U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is heading to Shanghai and Beijing for 3 days of talks with senior Chinese officials as U.S.-China ties are at a critical point. His visit also comes amid rising concern in Europe over Chinese espionage charges, with several suspected spies detained in Germany and in the U.K. in the last few days. Selina Sykes takes a closer look.
As the US's top diplomat heads to China in a bid to improve fractured ties, concerns are on the rise in the West over Chinese espionage. The arrests of several suspected spies in Germany and the UK have made the headlines this week, though cyber attacks from afar are a much bigger concern for governments. China is the country behind the most cyber attacks in the world, ahead of Russia. Beijing was responsible for 240 state-affiliated attacks between 2005 and 2023, according to the European Repository of Cyber Incidents. The US is China's most sought-after target, as Beijing tries to disrupt its rival superpower's economy, national security and politics.
China is trying to cheat its way into the top of industries in the 21st century. Intellectual property they don't subsidize or buy through shell companies, their cyber spies will steal. The scale of the theft is just staggering. A survey of chief financial officers estimates that 1 in 5 U.S. corporations has had their IP stolen.
But Beijing is increasingly setting its sights beyond the US to Europe. In 2021, 30% of German companies said they had been attacked from China. That figure rose to 43% just a year later. Attacks that are proving costly. While not entirely from Beijing, cyber attacks are estimated to have left German companies 223 billion euros out of pocket, or 6% of the country's GDP in 2021. Concerns over cyber espionage have pushed both the US and the EU to take out measures against several big Chinese companies in recent years, such as Huawei and TikTok, while increasing protection of technologies with the highest risk of being misused, including AI, genetic engineering, and microchips.
Joining us for À Propos, our in-depth look at this very topic, our guest is Steve Tsang, a director of SOAS in London at the China Institute at University of London. Thank you so much for joining us on France 24. Tell us, Professor, what are we to make of these arrests, of these accusations of spying?
Well, first of all, we do follow the rule of law. So at the moment, those people are being suspected and detained and charged, but we have not yet proven that they are spies for China. Having said that, we should not be surprised if China is actively engaged in espionage. China is a rising superpower with global ambitions. It has a need to understand where we are, what we do, and also to infiltrate us as new rising superpowers normally do.
I mean, does the need to understand how we function, as you say, how we work, does that entail spying necessarily?
Well, it doesn't have to be relying on spying only, and the Chinese certainly will be using open sources information to try to understand us. But it is a country where secrecy and the state loom very large, and therefore they will be using espionage as something that would be normal to them.
Well, I mean, Professor, the way you say it sounds a little bit like the spying, if it were to be proven true, would be a way for China to learn about the way that things are conducted, government, business in the West. I imagine when you say the rest of the world, you're really talking about the West. But is it not also in a way to disrupt the way that government is held, or the way that policies are written in Brussels and in London as well? I mean, is this not also to play a more disturbing role in the rest of the world?
Well, to influence is something that superpowers also do. I think we have to acknowledge the reality that all great powers engage in some elements of espionage. And we like to think that among friends, we do not spy on each other. But China does not exactly see us as a friend. And therefore, China's spying on us is not something that we should be surprised. I think in a sense, it was naive on our part to have previously thought that China was not actively engaged in spying operations against us and engaging in influence operations. Of course they are doing that.
Right. Of course, China would spy on us just as we, as you're saying, we would spy on them. Yes, of course, an ally on paper, but tensions are quite high, even as Blinken is heading to China for a 3-day visit. What are the main points of contention we have besides, the world economy, the world of business, and what are the other kind of the points of tension between the West and China, or just Washington and Beijing as we speak?
Well, the two biggest issues really is over the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the support that China has given to Russia for its invasion and the supply of equipment that will enable Russia to sustain its military capabilities to do so. There is also the issue of China's medium to longer term ambitions over Taiwan, which is a major issue that could potentially pitch the United States against China in a crisis that could have devastating consequences for the rest of the world. I think those will be main issues that Antony Blinken would want to be engaging with his Chinese counterpart. But the Chinese foreign minister is probably not exactly very keen to engage too deeply on these subjects.
Let's talk a little bit more about China's role in Ukraine and in its support for Russia. What kind of support, what does that entail exactly, China's support for Russia in this war against Ukraine?
Well, from the start of the war, Chinese policy could be summed up as one of declaring neutrality, supporting Putin, but refusing to pay any price. So China will give Russia every support the Russians ask for, as long as those support will not trigger secondary sanctions from the US and the West. So they are not supplying finished weapon systems to China because that will immediately trigger Western sanctions. But anything short of that, electronics, engines, and other equipment required to make the Russian military function, yes, they will supply them. Much more economic engagements to sustain the Russian economy so that the Russians can continue the war in Ukraine, yes, they are delivering that. And of course, the Chinese are also getting sweetheart deals in terms of the energy supplies from Russia.
Yeah, and among those industries that China is very keen to keep close to its chest is that of green mining of rare earths. 90% of the world's rare earths come from China, and that is a big source of raw materials for the electrification, the semiconductors, chips, things that have been in the headlines recently about who controls, who makes, who sells. Does China have a monopoly on that as we speak? And is that position of monopoly, is it something that is giving it power over its rivals?
Well, China does not have a monopoly over rare earth or indeed most of items, but it has a chokehold on some of them, some of the most important critical materials, including rare earth. And the Chinese are not unaware that this gives them a lot of leverage. but they have so far been fairly careful in not overreaching themselves and triggering too much of a Western's response. They are very much aware of the European Union's de-risking strategy as something that could escalate and put the Chinese economy less enjoying a chokehold on Western economies. They want that Western dependency on the Chinese economy to continue.
Thank you so much for joining us and answering our questions. Steve Tsang, you are director of SOAS China Institute at the University of London. Thank you so much for answering our questions on France 24.
Thank you.